Well, welcome. We're excited to be coming to you live this afternoon from our campaign, sarah2020.com. For those of you watching on the live stream, I want to shout out Space for helping us with captions today. Space is an innovative Portland-based nonprofit with the mission of making arts and cultural events accessible and inclusive to the deaf and hard of hearing. I'm happy to support them and very happy for their help in making this live stream accessible. You can view our captions in real time at sarah2020.com/captions. Thank you, Space, and thank you to our captioners this afternoon. Speaking of inclusion, I would love to include you in this conversation if you're watching live. Please feel free to join us by commenting on this video. Your comments will come straight into my team and we'll try to incorporate the questions into the conversation. If you're watching later or listening to us on the podcast, you can also email us at ourportland.com. So that said, I have queued up an engaging, inspiring speaker to chat with us this afternoon about her experiences, not just in Portland, but in a variety of cities around the US. And I love people who bring a diversity of perspectives. As someone who's worked internationally, talking with other cities and done best practices exchanges with so many US cities, I think hearing about people's experiences and putting their experiences in Portland in context is so important. Libra Forde I met her. I actually didn't meet her before we went on this podcast. She was speaking at a youth-led march in Lentz that I attended probably 6 weeks ago now. And I was so inspired by her words about empowering our youth as the solution to so many of the problems that we're facing, that I hunted her down on LinkedIn and said, please, will you come and join us today and make sure that we can have a conversation about your vision and your perspective on what's happening here in our city. She's the CEO over at SEI, and she can tell you a little bit about that, but I really want to talk about her passion, which is leadership and empowering our youth. And she comes to us from a background that's not particularly political, so she has some unique perspectives to share with us there. Libra, thank you for coming to our podcast today. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. I knew of you before. Like I said to you before, I was super excited that you had reached out to me.
Well, so tell us, you've only been in Portland a few years. So what brought you to Portland?
Well, education brought me to Portland. I lived in Hawaii with my family, and I had a daughter at that time. I was in high school excelling, but Hawaii is not known for education. It's known for hospitality, and we realized early that we had to get her to a spot where she could have a chance of getting into college, a good college that she wanted to get into, without struggling getting across the ocean. So we decided to come to Oregon. It was one of the regions that I worked in for my company that I worked for, so it just was an easy fit.
And you're moving here, and then you end up in this space where you're now working to empower Portland's youth. And what do you see as some of the biggest challenges in this current work that you're engaged in? And what are some of the big opportunities for us in this moment in the work you're engaged in here?
Yeah, so I've always been an advocate for youth, even in Hawaii. I started a school there because children needed support there. And then so every space I've gone to, I've been an advocate for youth because someone was an advocate for me. I tell people all the time, I was a kid that was headed on a special education track. And in the 80s and 90s, that was very different. There wasn't a lot of support. It was literally like a gaping hole that you would fall into that you couldn't get out of. And I had adults in my life who fought for me. And so coming to Oregon, it wasn't going to be any different for me. And I have youth. So I believe that if we can support youth in a way that is conducive to what they need, not what we want, but what they need, it creates a future for us that we all can be proud of.
What does it mean to really let youth lead, though? Because we hear a lot of people doing that, right? We'll see our leaders, they stand beside the young people at the photo ops and they say, oh, the children are the future. But when it comes right down to it, what we've seen time and again is youth are tired of that. They don't want to be pawns in your photo op. Two, they're tired of being misrepresented in terms of what they're interested in. and they actually want to be heard and they want to do work. So what do you see as the disconnect there in our inability to truly, I don't know if it's about trusting them or if it's about empowering them, but where's the disconnect between what people say they want and what's actually happening when it comes to engaging our young people?
Yeah. Um, Youth are visionaries, right? And they lead with their heart. And we're in a nation that leads with their mind. And so it's very difficult for people that have a mindset view of the world to let heart set people, young and old, lead. And so it's messy, it's emotional, it's all the things that make people uncomfortable. And so the challenges for adults is really checking themselves and stepping back and allowing it to be messy and allowing the heart to lead so that we can see some real vision. Youth don't have a lot of cloud in their lenses that we do as adults. We've been damaged in different ways. We've gone through trauma that then makes us hesitate to move forward. Youth are energetic. They're fearless. They feel emboldened to be different, to use their vision as a way, as a guiding light. And a lot of times as adults, we get in the way of that. And so it's important for us to listen and not critique immediately. I have a friend that also says conversate before you actually judge someone, but listening in the conversation and not making judgment or trying to fix is really the key to letting them lead.
It's such a hard thing for people who hold all the power to divest of that power and trust that the outcomes are going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't know that we always trust the young people to lead. Do you see any examples of places where it's working really well in our city right now?
Yeah, I think what's happening in the streets right now is amazing, and for many people it's uncomfortable, right? Because there is unrest and they don't know what's happening. A lot of adult leaders that I talk to say, well, "What's going on? What are we asking for? What is this? What is that?" And I constantly try to remind them we speak as this situation as if the '60s and the civil rights movement wasn't as messy. These were youthful leaders, youthful people who wanted to see change, but it was a mindset so people could get in line with it quicker. It was about paper. It was about getting things written down, getting people to sign things. And so the structure was there. But a lot of times what we've done in kind of capturing history is we say, well, day one, we were upset. And day two, we created this paperwork. And day three, the president signed it. That's just not true. We all know that movements are messy. And so right now, what I see is the same kind of thing. Energy is there. We're making moves. The youth are engaged. They want to see something, and we should sit back and really just support them in trying to figure out how to get answers. But they're there. They're doing it, and I'm excited. I love watching them.
Yeah, chaos isn't everybody's natural habitat, though. I
No.
mean, there are a lot of people for who complexity, chaos, and what looks like potentially even the lack of control, or Attorney General Bill Barr called it like complete terrorist anarchy, right? When they can't wrap their hands around controlling the situation, and the youth in their energy, which is nearly boundless, their creativity, which you said is uncircumscribed, and
Mhm.
their vision and their optimism is still intact, unlike many elders who have become cynical over years of the work, that they don't like that wildness of it, and they don't like that potentially makes their power tenuous, because those young people, they don't really care about those secret handshakes and what those folks are doing.
Not at all. They could care less. Not to mention, in their visions, they are absolutely courageous, and they're willing to do things outside of the box to create hope and something different, because they see a need for something different, and that's inspiring to me.
So one of these questions came in off the Facebook, I think, and it's a good one. It says, how can we balance protecting our young people,
Mhm.
the upsurges in the pandemic, and meeting their psychosociological and mental health needs at this time? Like, I'm
Mhm.
sure you're seeing a lot of young people, despite all of the good things happening, struggling in the midst of the crisis too. Like, what can we do to be supporting our youth right now?
Yeah. I think that there's all levels of it, right? When you go to the protests, the youth are very aware of where we are and what's happening. I have not been to any of the protests where they haven't been like intentionally social distancing. They all wear a mask. They do all these things. They're very conscious of where we are and what's happening, conscious of each other and space. I think that then there is this traumatic part of what's happening right now where there are a lot of youth and adults who are struggling. There's a traumatic mindset that is really difficult to manage when you can't engage with the typical resources that may help you manage some of the stressors and the trauma that's coming from now. So I would say that you got to find experts that work for you. You got to find circles that are safe for you. It's definitely not a one size fit all. You got to find out how to get through it though and manage it in a way that's intentional and best for your world. Everybody's going to see it differently and everybody's going to do it differently. And the last thing is you can't judge people on how they choose to do it because everyone needs something very specific to them, and judging that doesn't help them get through it. It actually is more harmful.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, it just really is about being empathetic and trying to put yourself in the position of people who may be struggling a little bit to make sure that they're being fully resourced.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, we often try to say what people need as opposed to just saying, what do you need? And
Yeah.
then showing up when they give you that answer, not judging it.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things I know, I have a 20-year-old daughter, and she benefits from most of the privileges that I have, although being in her age group, the looming climate crisis, I think, adds another layer of burden on everyone who's young right now. But I know that access to education, access to employment are so challenging, even in the quote unquote best of times for our young people.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are we doing as adults well, or maybe where are we dropping the ball in keeping them like their lives with something to do, or that they're self-sustaining in their own lives? Are you seeing them struggle with this at all, or what are you observing that they're needing?
Well, there's a spectrum, right? Of course, when you have people that have been disproportionately um, under resourced, this era, this time is definitely not helping them find resources, right? And then there's the other end of the spectrum where resources are accessible, but yet they can't get to those resources because of the time. And in that spectrum, what I find is we sometimes overthink what youth have developed in their own mind as a way to cope, and we also diminish the power of their communication and how they like to communicate, and we want to judge it as if it's too much screen time or they just text message, there's no human connection, which all of those things are absolutely true, but in their world they feel good about those things, right? And so diminishing those things in a way where we're chastising them or not allowing them to find those spaces as valuable cannot be helpful many times. A lot of times we need to ask better questions of, well, why do you do that? And the answers might just shock adults in why kids choose to approach communication in the way that they do. Not to say that there shouldn't be a spectrum of ways to handle things, but looking at them and what they are doing and see more of the opportunity and less of the negativity behind it may be the first step for an adult to really hone in on what kids really need during these times. And then the kids that are under resourced, of course, there's organizations out there that are really working hard to make sure that they get the access, and just supporting that is important in making sure that those agencies are getting what they need, as well as volunteering and supporting them and making sure we get the resources to those kids.
And you ran for school board.
Yes.
Did you end up winning your election?
Yeah, I was appointed initially, and then I ran for my current seat now. So I'm the chair of the North Clackamas School Board this year.
So what does it mean for you as a school board member to balance what we're talking about in terms of budget cuts, the needs of our youth in this time, public schools? Like, what are you seeing on the front of public schools from your perspective?
Well, two things. One, when I speak about the decisions behind education right now, it's really a life or death decision. And a lot of times there's nuances in there that, of course, people want to talk about that are very specific. And the specificity of those things are valuable. And I don't diminish any of the value behind that. But the overarching decision right now is a life or death decision. And I'm going with life every single time. And so that's the primary goal in the school board, in my see how I see it. The other side of this is the opportunity that we've been presented. I think that children have always been educated in one way in our school system, and what we're seeing is that there might be other opportunities of educating students that may be very valuable. Not for everybody, but as we unravel this, I hope that we can combine all of our resources that we've discovered and get to more children in a way that's effective for them, not effective for our systems, but effective for each individual child. So I'm excited about that opportunity. There's a lot of work being done, but we're having a lot of discovery at the same time.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I see in Portland Public Schools, there's been some tension between obviously the needs of the staff and faculty and their need to maintain social distancing and take care of their families. So the workers' perspective, also the students and the health of their families. But then we see that the people who don't have access to these institutions, when they fall between the cracks, it's become really clear that the divides that were here pre-COVID are only amplified by COVID. And
Absolutely.
that the the solutions sometimes are not innovative and always meeting people where they're at. So I agree with you. This is a big opportunity for us to do better in many ways if we can address those needs and hit them head on.
That's right. Yeah.
So education, valuing education as a pathway to not just opportunity, but liberty is something that you and I share. I think we talked about that in our initial discussion. Where do you think we can be doing better?
In education specifically?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Man, I think diversity of approach is the key for me. And I say this, I've been saying this for years. The school that I helped start in Hawaii was a hybrid model. So now we're talking about hybrid models. We did this in 2007 specifically for military families because there was a different need for the military family that was going through a combat time. And so diversity of approach is the key. The education system is the last monopoly of the world. And we have broken up monopolies with true intention because we see that it's just not helpful. But for some reason, we haven't done that in education. And so we have to diversify approach. Every child needs to be approached from a very customized way, like this is what I need to do. And it sounds complex, it sounds difficult, but it only sounds that way because we've never tried. But if we can really diversify the approach of education, I think we could be onto something in terms of including all and making sure that all children are actually moving forward in a way that works for them and their family.
And I think as the Portland mayor, you know, a lot of times people ask me, how are you going to help schools? And I talk to them about the fact that there's 6 school districts in Portland. Our budgets don't overlap. So I can take this defunding and demilitarization agenda with Portland police as seriously as anyone wants me to, and it still doesn't get me that money straight into schools. So what does it mean for us as residents of this city and this region to really come together as community members and say, hey, we're going to support our students, we're going to support their families, even if I don't have kids in schools right now? Does this mean that Portland Parks and Rec needs to step up? Does this mean that we're really bringing every tool to this problem so that these young people are supported through this time? Because ultimately, these are our leaders.
That's right.
They're stepping into these leadership positions, whether they like it or not, because our time is going to be up pretty soon and we need them. So I appreciate that you're working on so many fronts. I want to ask you one last question before we go, because it's a little outside the box, but you bring a background from wellness to this. And to me, something that's so important has to do with how we don't talk about health and wellness as much around these parameters when we're talking about things like the police budget. I never get to say, where's my public health analysis of this? Right? Like, but talk a little bit about, I know you and I got to just riff on this briefly, but what does it mean to have a place that's well and where people are healthy, and why does that matter?
Well, I mean, I started my wellness in basketball. Anyone that's met me, I'm 6'5", and so basketball was kind of thrown into my lap early, and then you immediately get you're attracted to this physicality of life, right? And so, but then as I got older, life happened. I had babies, and then the physicality changed for me. And in all of the things that I've gone through in my life, the only thing that healed me was a physical approach. And of course, all the mental, all those things were together, but physically I had to do a lot of work from myself in order to move forward in my personal healing. So I've never let that go. And I believe that if we don't have a healthy self, then it's very difficult to think healthy and to approach systems in a healthy way. It is not disconnected. And of course, when having a healthy self also means healthy systems that support you doing that, which would be healthcare, education, all these things that we talk about. they're all connected. And when I hear you talk about Parks and Rec and all these different systems that really work in isolation, as if a human being does not work holistically with all these systems throughout the day, they work in isolation, and that's a mistake. Health is connected to everything. Everything we're talking about, education, is a healthcare issue. If a kid doesn't have access to information, that's a healthcare issue, because without having access to information, then I don't know how to take care of myself. And so it always comes back to the body. It always comes back to healing and how do you take care of yourself. So I'm a huge advocate for that. I teach spinning, and I'm all about you staying healthy physically so that you can do this mental work.
Yeah, it's so critical. We had one social epidemiologist on who basically said all public policy is public health policy a couple of episodes ago. She said you can't get around it. And she's taught me so much too, because if we start applying that to the budget, there we go. We're going to have different outcomes.
Yeah,
I am so grateful that I had a chance to talk with you and get your voice in front of our audience, as modest as we are. I know there are a lot of Portlanders who are looking to voices just like yours, because they're so inspiring, but also so practical. That really touched me about you. So I appreciate you taking time to come on. And if folks want to find you, I guess our producer will put your Instagram in the show notes, and they can send you a little message of support and figure out how they can plug in to help with some of these things.
Absolutely.
Especially our friends on the edge of the UGB in Clackamas. We'll be happy to engage with you there. And we're glad to see such amazing regional leadership too. Libra, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Keep up the good work. Let me know how I can help. All right. I'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.